Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Lattes, Ladyfingers, and Lies, a Cape Bay Café mystery by Harper Lin, narrated by Marguerite Gavin. Chapter 1. I hummed as I stacked boxes in the back room of the café. I couldn't have been in a better mood. I was due to fly to Italy with my boyfriend Matt in 7 short days, and I was so excited I could barely contain myself. I picked a pack of napkins out of the shipping box, pirouetted to the shelves behind me, and made my best attempt to set the box on the shelf with the grace of a ballet dancer. It had been more years than I cared to think about since I'd last taken ballet, though, so I was pretty sure it looked more awkward than graceful. I spun again and plucked another box from the shipping container. La-da-dum, da-da-dum, da-da-dum, la-da-dum, I sang, da-da-dum-dum. "That's amore?" Sammy asked from the doorway. I jumped into the air, and not a graceful ballerina jump either. My hand flew to my chest as I turned to look at her. I could tell from the burning sensation that my cheeks flamed. "What?" I was so startled I couldn't remember what she'd said, only that she'd caught me smack in the middle of my Dean Martin Gene Kelly song and dance routine. Sammy pressed her lips together and blinked hard, but she couldn't hide the twitching in her cheeks as she tried to keep from laughing. "You were singing That's Amore," she said as evenly as she could. "Was I?" "Mm-hmm." Her blue eyes twinkled. I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "My grandmother used to play it a lot. It gets stuck in my head sometimes." "I'm sure." She laughed. "It couldn't possibly have anything to do with a certain trip to a certain foreign country with a certain man." If it was possible, my blush grew even deeper. A laugh bubbled up out of Sammy's throat. "Don't worry, Fran. It's our little secret." She stepped into the room and grabbed the box I'd put on the shelf. "I just need some more napkins for the counter, and I'll be out of your way." She flashed me a smile and disappeared back into the café. I waited for a few seconds with my eye on the door in case she came back, then returned to unpacking. I found myself still humming, but managed to keep my dancing mostly in check as I emptied the last few supplies from the box. When I was done, I broke down the box and tossed it out the back door with the recycling, perhaps with a bit more of a flourish than I normally would have. As I walked back inside, I lingered in the doorway between the storeroom and the café, surveying the space with a slight smile on my face. It was simple and cozy, and no place in the world felt more like home to me. I had spent nearly as much time inside these walls as I had inside my own house. The exposed brick walls, the mismatched tables and chairs, the handwritten menu hanging high on the wall, they had all been the same for as long as I could remember, since I was a child running around and getting in the way as my grandparents and my mother served coffee, sandwiches, and desserts to the people of Cape Bay, Massachusetts. I considered it both a duty and a privilege to be the sole proprietor of Antonia's Italian Café, the business that had been my immigrant family's life work. The café was moderately full, pretty much what I expected on a mid-October Tuesday afternoon. A group of women clustered in the armchairs in the corner, ostensibly for their book club meeting, but I hadn't seen any of them crack a book yet. They sat with their lattes and ladyfingers or scones, or, for the daring few, cupcakes, and chatted. Rhonda, who worked for me part-time, was one of them. She caught my eye and waved. The Mommy Brigade, she called them. A group of mostly stay-at-home moms who got together while their kids were in school to relax and enjoy one another's company. A few other customers were at the café tables along the wall, a couple of retirees, some people on break from their jobs at other shops along Main Street, others just enjoying a cup of coffee and a few quiet moments to themselves. Sammy bustled around behind the counter, checking to make sure we had plenty of clean dishes on the shelves, straightening things up, and exchanging a word here and there with the customers. I knew the name of almost everyone in the room, and I recognized the faces of most of the rest of them. The tourist season was all but over in our small beach town, but ironically, it was actually busier than it usually was on a weekday afternoon at the height of the season. It was as if all the locals hid in their homes when the vacationers were around and came out again when things were quieter. It was busier, but somehow easier to manage at the same time. The vacationers came in noisy packs that were confused, demanding, or both. Multi-generation families who seemed to think we were a full-service restaurant, groups of college students who assumed we served cocktails, New Yorkers who thought we were Starbucks and couldn't be bothered to order in normal English. None of that from the locals. They came in, ordered something we actually sold, and sat down to enjoy their drinks without snapping their fingers or yelling at Sammy or me when they wanted sugar for their coffee they'd only moments before sworn they wanted black. The locals were more laid back, busy enjoying their everyday lives in the company of their friends, not trying to make the cafe and its offerings into something they weren't. A man came in, and Sammy greeted him with her trademark brilliant grin. She moved to fill his order almost as soon as he started talking. She had a plate topped with a paper doily resting on the counter, ready for his dessert order before he had even finished paying. After handing him his card and receipt, she picked up the plate and stepped over to the case displaying our array of baked goods. She put a glove on one hand and slid the case's door open with the other. She reached her gloved hand into the case and pulled out a small handful of Ladyfingers. Instead of putting them on the plate, she stopped and looked into the case. She stood up suddenly and turned toward me. "Fran?" she said loudly, then jumped when she saw me standing in the doorway. "Oh, I didn't realize you were right there." She paused for a second, looking thrown off by me not being deep in the back room. We were getting good at this startling each other thing today. She hesitated. "Can you check on whether we have any more Ladyfingers in the back? We're all out up here." "Sure thing." I went back into the storeroom and checked the box of Ladyfingers. Crumbs. Usually we were better than that at keeping track of our stock. I picked up the phone to call Monica and ask her to bring some more when she delivered our next batch of tiramisu, and if she could bring more than last time. Monica owned her namesake Italian restaurant in the next town. She served the most delectable desserts, including her homemade tiramisu. It was absolutely one of the best things I'd ever tasted, although to be fair, just about everything Osteria di Monica served was incredible. Back in the summer, we'd worked out a deal for me to sell her tiramisu in our cafe. Monica delivered it a few times a week, and it was by far our top-selling sweet. A few weeks ago, it had finally dawned on me that the Ladyfingers she made for the tiramisu would be great for dipping in coffee. As soon as Monica's first batch landed on the display case, customers snapped them up faster even than I'd expected, as evidenced by her empty display case. I spent a few minutes chatting with Monica on the phone after I let her know we'd need an extra batch. She was predictably unsurprised that they were selling so well. She never lacked in confidence when it came to her cooking, and deservedly so. She wouldn't let me off the phone until we'd had a nice chat about my upcoming trip. She was almost as excited about the Italy trip as I was. "I talked to Stefano," she said. "He and Adriana are looking forward to showing you Venice. I talked to them on the computer. It's remarkable what technology can do now. To think I cannot just talk to my grandson half a world away, but I can see him too. We couldn't have dreamed of such things when I came here from Italy, or even when Alberto was, 25 years ago now. And Adriana is lovely. I can't wait to meet her in person. I'm so looking forward to hearing what you think of her, Francesca." Monica's grandson Stefano had been in Venice for nearly 2 years, learning proper Italian cooking so that he could come back and work in the family restaurant. Monica was more than a little excited that he was bringing his trained chef girlfriend with him, and not just because she could help out in the restaurant. Monica expected to hear news of a proposal any day. In addition to Monica extracting a promise from Stefano to give Matt and me the grand tour, she'd also given me a list of all the places in the entire Veneto region where we needed to visit or eat. I was fairly certain we would barely have the time to visit a fraction of the places she'd told me about. We'd be there for 2 weeks, but our itinerary had us covering the entire country, from Venice and Verona in the north down to Rome and Naples and even Sicily, so we wouldn't have much time to experience each place. The bell over the door jingled. A woman a few years older than me rushed in. She looked harried with her mousy brown layer cuts sticking out and her royal blue sweater set pulled askew. She looked like a soccer mom who'd gotten a little too riled up about the wait in the carpool line. She gave away and said something to the book clubbers as she hurried past them on her way to the counter. She gave her order to Sammy and paid, then darted back over to the circle of women in the corner, grabbing a chair and dragging it noisily over to their table. I noticed she did not have a book with her. As Sammy prepared the drink, a couple of business types got up from their table and left. I wasn't sure of their names, but I recognized them as regulars. Sammy glanced in their direction and smiled. "Thanks, guys," she called. "See you tomorrow." I saw her eyes flit over to the table they had just left and the dishes scattered across it. We hadn't been working together long, only since I'd taken over the cafe after my mother's sudden death a few months ago, but I could read her mind. "I'll get it." I walked over, piled the dishes up, and took them into the back, then grabbed a rag to take back to wipe down the table. I turned the bud vase on the table so the Peruvian lilies in it had their most attractive side facing out. The tin that held the sweeteners was a little low, so I grabbed a handful from the back and brought them out to disperse among the tables. I finished as Sammy got the disheveled woman's drink ready. "Here." I reached out for the cup and saucer. "The woman in blue." She nodded in the book club's direction. She hesitated when she realized 3 of the women in the group were wearing blue shirts. I saw her come in. I smiled. "Thanks." I took the cup and saucer in one hand and grabbed a handful of napkins in the other. The book clubbers always needed more napkins. Someone was always spilling her drink or pouring it on herself or needing to wipe her hands or her mouth or blot her lipstick. No matter how many napkins they had, they always seemed to need more. I sat the drink down in front of the disheveled woman in blue and put the napkins in the middle of the table. "I thought you ladies might need some more of these." "Oh, thank you," one of them exclaimed, immediately picking one up and dabbing at an invisible spot on her blouse. "Ellen always needs more napkins." Another nodded at Ellen, who was still studying her shirt to see if she'd gotten the spot out. Based on the 2 other women who had also immediately grabbed at the pile, I suspected Ellen wasn't the only one. The woman who had spoken had her head tilted back at an awkward angle, and there was a band of light across the bottom of her face. I glanced at the window and saw that indeed sun poured in, trying to blind her. "Do you want me to close these blinds for you?" I asked. "Oh, please, yes, that would be wonderful." "If you'll just excuse me 1 second." I scooted behind one of the women as I wondered how the book clubbers all seemed to need things, napkins, the blinds closed, but didn't ask for any of them. It was especially odd since Rhonda sat right there with them. Surely they knew she worked at the cafe and would know that we didn't mind customers closing the blinds in lieu of squinting. Certain the women needed something else, some sugar, a refill, directions to the restroom. I opened my mouth to ask if there was anything else I could do for them. Before I could say anything, though, I realized why, today at least, they were all so reluctant to get up from the table. Chapter 2. "Do they have any suspects?" Ellen asked, apparently satisfied that her blouse was clean. Suspects? Suspects in what? I froze momentarily with my hand on the blind cord. Cape Bay had had an unsettling number of murders in the past few months, though otherwise crime was very low. Sure, there was some petty crime, especially during the summer. Teenagers stealing someone's beach umbrella by moving it 500 feet down the beach, teenagers shoplifting bags of chips from the local convenience store, teenagers getting caught drinking, basically a lot of teenagers getting up to no good. Other than that, Cape Bay was a safe place to live, the kind of place where people didn't lock their doors and kept their keys in their cars. Except for the murders. In the split second before the disheveled woman answered Ellen's question, I found myself hoping against hope that it wasn't another one of those, and that some teenager had gone a little overboard and decorated the boardwalk with some spray paint. Not as far as I know. I mean, it's only been a few hours. I saw on TV that if they don't find a suspect in the first 48 hours, it's unlikely that they'll find one at all. The woman who'd had the sun in her eyes said, "Well, it hasn't been 48 hours yet, has it, Diane?" Ellen snapped back at her. The 2 of them seemed to have some particular grudge against each other, the way they snipped at each other. I'd have to remember to ask Rhonda what their deal was. Diane ignored her. "Who found her?" My throat went dry as I hoped that the her in question was a car, not a woman. I made it a point to stay out of my customers' conversations unless invited, but in this case, I knew I had to butt in. "Found her?" My voice came out all hoarse and scratchy. Rhonda looked up at me and nodded slightly. I closed my eyes and wished this wasn't happening. "You hadn't heard?" Ellen asked. Before I could shake my head no, Diane spoke up. "Well, none of us had before Susan came in and told us, did we?" Ellen gave Diane a dirty look. "Who was it?" I asked. The $1,000,000 question. Everyone looked at the disheveled woman, who I now knew to be Susan. "Georgina." "Rockwell?" Susan nodded. I put my hand against the window frame to steady myself. Georgina Rockwell. She worked down the street at Howard Jewelers. I didn't know her well, but we'd chatted a few times, and the last time I'd seen her at the cafe, we'd talked about getting together sometime for drinks and to chat. That had been 2 days ago. What happened? Everyone looked at Susan again. She looked at her coffee and sighed. There was a robbery at the jewelry store. Georgina got caught up in it somehow and... She stopped and shook her head. I stared at her in shock. I didn't know what to say. A robbery at one of our little Cape Bay shops was horrifying enough, but one that ended in murder? It sent chills down my spine. But what did they do to her? Diane asked. I mean, did they shoot her? I couldn't quite blame her. I wanted to know too, but it seemed so crude to ask. The other women seemed to feel the same way, based on the mix of horror and intrigue on their faces. Susan shook her head. She leaned toward the rest of the women and dropped her voice down low enough so that anyone not at the table wouldn't be able to hear her. They, used a brick to break the window. They threw it, and it hit her. She mimed something flying through the air and hitting her in the temple. I cringed at the thought. When? I asked. When did it happen? Last night around 10, they said. 10? 10 p.m.? I couldn't believe I'd heard her right. Everything on Main Street closed by 9, especially at this time of year, when we hardly had a tourist outside of the weekends. In fact, I was pretty sure Howard Jewelers closed around 5 or 6. I wasn't really sure, but I knew the shop was dark when I closed up the cafe each night. Susan nodded. What was Georgina doing there at 10 o'clock at night? She shrugged. I can't imagine, unless they were doing inventory or something, but then Dean would have been there, I don't know. You never told us who found her. Apparently Diane used that same snippy tone of voice with everyone, not just Ellen. Dean, the brick set off the alarm company called Dean, and when he got there, there she was. Their alarm company doesn't call the police? I asked. Ours did. Police first, me second. I guess not. That seemed strange. The whole point of the alarm was to call the police. What was I going to do if the cafe was being broken into? Call the police, of course. For as much as I paid the alarm company every month, the least they could do was save me the trouble and call the authorities themselves. That way the police would get there faster, and I'd be spared the trauma of finding the body of one of my employees. I looked over at Sammy and imagined responding to a late-night alarm call to find her bloody on the floor. I shuddered. It would be awful. Poor Dean, I said softly. Dean Howard was the Howard in Howard Jewelers. Well, his family was, anyway. The jewelry shop had been in his family for at least a couple of generations, selling engagement rings and Mother's Day gifts and First Communion necklaces to the men and women of Cape Bay. Dean was several years older than me, so I didn't know him well when we were growing up, but I remembered both being intimidated by him and thinking he was impossibly cool when I'd try to go play on the playground at the park, only to find him hanging out on the swings, always with a girl, and always puffing on a cigarette. Of course, that was back before it was quite so well known how bad smoking is for you. And in any case, the fact that he was breaking the rules was probably what made him seem so cool in my childhood eyes anyway. Shh, Diane interjected. Dean's a hard-nose. It probably didn't even faze him. Finding one of his employees dead? My voice came out a little louder than it should have. I glanced around the cafe with an embarrassed smile. Fortunately, the place had emptied out a little, so my outburst only served to disturb a few people. Sammy, though, gave me a concerned look from behind the counter. I tried to force a more natural smile, but gave up and mouthed, I'll tell you later. She raised her eyebrows, but went back to stacking dishes. Diane shrugged. Think what you want. I gritted my teeth. Diane was the one who could think what she wanted. As far as I knew, she hadn't ever found a dead body. I had. It was one of the worst moments of my life. And that death hadn't even been bloody. I thought he was asleep, until I realized he wasn't. Diane could go fly a kite, as my grandmother would have said. He may still be down at the store, Susan said. I think he had quite a bit of cleaning up to do. I winced. I didn't want to think about the cleanup Dean would have to do. Did you talk to him? I was curious how she had so much information when I hadn't even heard about the break-in or Georgina's death. Oh, no! She pulled her head back like the idea was revolting. My friend Margaret works down at the police station. We had lunch together, and she told me all about it. Margaret Robbins? Susan nodded. Of course it was Margaret Robbins. She worked the front desk at the police department and was a known chatterbox. We'd gone to high school together, and she'd been the same way back then. If anyone would know all the details and freely share them, it would be her. I leaned against the window and tried to process everything I'd heard. It was horrible. I admit I forgot I was intruding on my customer's space and conversation. The jingle of the bell over the door brought me back to my senses. A group of 5 walked in, dressed in business clothes and carrying laptop bags and notepads. A couple of them glanced around, first at the big table where the book clubbers were gathered, then at the opposite side of the cafe that only had little two-tops. They made a beeline for the two-tops. Not that I could blame them. I'd had more than one coffee shop meeting when I was working in New York, and we always sat as far away from other people as we could. It was the only way we could actually manage to get anything done without being interrupted by nosy people eavesdropping and asking questions about what we were working on, or hipster types who would immediately start going on loudly about how they could never sell out and go to work for the man like us corporate drones, which was why they worked part-time for minimum wage at the big chain bookstore. I couldn't imagine how distracting it would be to sit next to people discussing a murder. Sammy caught my eye. I nodded and flashed her a smile. I knew she could handle a group that size with no problem, but why should she when I was there? I looked back at the book club women and smiled politely. "Is there anything else I can get you, ladies?" A couple of them shook their heads, and a couple glanced at the others before declining. "No, we're fine," Diane said without looking at anyone else. I saw Ellen roll her eyes and Rhonda quickly look out the window. "All right. Well, if I can get you anything, please let me know." I paused as I walked past Susan's chair. "I apologize for interrupting, but thank you for sharing the information about Georgina." Susan gave me a weak smile and nodded. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Diane make a face. What on earth was with that woman? I did my best to keep my expression neutral and joined Sammy behind the counter. The business crew had pushed several of the two-tops together, dropped off their bags, and lined up at the counter. Sammy took the orders as I started filling them. 2 black coffees, 1 hot tea, 1 iced tea, and 1 latte, ordered with a smile and a nod in my direction. Lattes were my specialty. The method of preparation was something that had been perfected in my family over generations. My mother had started creating images in the lattes she made back in the late 1980s, when latte art first became a thing, but she never really branched out beyond hearts and rosettes. During the long hours I used to spend at the cafe after school when I was a teenager, though, I learned hearts and rosettes, then suns and moons and stars, rabbits, bears, flowers, scorpions, snowflakes, random patterns, and whatever else I could think of. My friends came in and started asking for more complicated designs, a beach scene, a mountain, and before long, everyone in town knew that little Franny Amaro could create some pretty amazing things in a latte. Whenever I came home from college for a break, I'd be put back to work in the cafe, and the locals would flock in to see what new designs I'd come up with. Even though I'd been away for years after graduation, it hadn't taken long after I'd gotten back to work full-time at the cafe for people to start coming in just to get me to make them lattes. Some of them, like the business guy who'd just ordered, I didn't even recognize, but somehow they knew me. It was like being a kind of celebrity. Lattes were a weird thing to be known for, but I figured it was better than some of the things people were small-town famous for. The head cheerleader from 25 years ago, the teacher who married a former student, the guy who wrecked his father's brand-new lobster boat when he took it out drunk on prom night. I knew all of those people and had had more than one conversation that identified them that way. "Who?" I'd ask when Sammy would refer to someone like I was supposed to know. "Dave Sampson," she'd repeat. "You know, the one who got drunk and wrecked his dad's new fishing boat on prom night?" "Oh, yeah," I'd reply, suddenly clearly remembering Dave and the boat with the giant hole in the hull and the look on his parents' faces as they took custody of him from the Coast Guard. Even though Dave was now a married father of 4 with a successful law practice in Boston, to the citizens of Cape Bay, he would always be known for the boat wreck. Compared to that, I was quite happy to be known for my milk-pouring skills. I prepared each of the basic drinks, the black coffees and the teas, and set them on a tray as Sammy pulled the food, 1 cupcake, 1 tiramisu to share, and 1 mozzarella tomato basil sandwich. They'd ordered out of the display case. The man who'd ordered the latte lingered near the register when I started pulling his espresso shot. That wasn't really unusual. Plenty of people were as interested in the process of creating latte art as they were by the end product. "Anything in particular you'd like?" I asked as I steamed the milk. He shrugged and smiled. "Whatever you feel like making." I nodded. I loved having creative freedom, but it was always a little anxiety-inducing when the person knew my work but I didn't know them. I wanted to make something impressive, but I didn't know what would impress them. Some people were astounded by a well-done circle. Others weren't fazed unless it was competition-worthy. I had no idea where on the spectrum this guy would fall, but the milk was ready, and I needed to pour. I tipped the pitcher over the cup. 2 circles, one a little larger than the other. I grabbed a toothpick. Carefully, I used it to etch a ring around the bigger circle, then added a series of pinpricks scattered around the cup. He leaned across the counter. "Saturn," he said, noticing the orb and rings. "And what's that? Uranus and then the stars? That's amazing. You're as good as I heard." "Thank you." I blushed a little. I put the cup and saucer on the tray that Sammy was waiting to take over to the tables the group had pushed together. The guy lingered for an extra couple of seconds and smiled at me before walking over to the table. I wiped down the espresso machine. Sammy dropped the drinks and food off at the table and came back around the corner. "So," she leaned against the counter and nodded at the book clubbers who were starting to get up. "What was that all about? Let's go in the back room." Chapter 3. Sammy covered her mouth with her hands. Tears filled her eyes. "Oh, my God. Georgina?" I reached out and rubbed her shoulder. "I can't believe it. She was here yesterday. She sat right there at the table in the corner. She had a latte and ladyfingers. I told her how pretty her hair was." She sniffed and looked at me. Mascara pooled under her eyes. She'd just gotten it done. It was a really pretty red. Suited her really well. I pictured Georgina in my mind. Red really would suit her. Her naturally brown hair had red undertones to begin with, and punching them up would have really brought out her coloring. I imagined her thick waves framing her face in a curtain of red. She'd been pretty to begin with, but I had a feeling she'd have been a stunning redhead. Just thinking about how she would never style her hair again, never to take advantage of her new color, made me sad. For some reason, it was always the stupid little stuff that hit me the hardest when someone died. A new haircut that wouldn't be enjoyed, a bag of souvenirs that would never be given to the family members eagerly awaiting them, the just-purchased bottle of perfume my mother never got to wear. Out of all the tragedies of a sudden death, those things most tore me up inside. I grabbed Sammy and hugged her. She clung to me, burying her face in my shoulder. At least my shirt was black, so the mascara stain wouldn't show. We stood like that until we heard a tap on the storage room door. I turned around to see Rhonda leaning against the doorframe. "Looks like you've got another murder to solve," she said. "I'm staying out of this one," I replied. "I think the police will appreciate it." I'd managed to get myself involved in the investigations of 3 murders in Cape Bay since I'd come back to town over the summer. It wasn't that I thought of myself as an amateur private investigator or anything like that, just that I somehow kept getting drawn into them. I'd ask one innocent question and boom, I was sucked in. My curiosity wouldn't let me let it go. I'd found some critical evidence in each case, but that didn't mean either the police or I were eager for me to go doing it again. "Ryan said you were really helpful last time, though," Sammy said. "Okay, so maybe the police didn't mind my meddling so much." Ryan Leary was the newest addition to the Cape Bay Police Department, coming on right before the last murder we'd had back at the end of the summer. While he and Sammy would both deny there was anything going on between them, they sure seemed to spend a lot of time together. "I'm leaving for Italy in a week. I have plenty to worry about besides solving Georgina's murder." I ticked off on my fingers what I'm going to wear over there, finalizing our itinerary, what I'm going to wear, making sure everything here at the cafe is in order, what I'm going to wear, making sure the dog is taken care of, what I'm going to wear. Rhonda and Sammy both laughed, Sammy through her tears. "You seemed a little worried about what you were going to wear in Italy," Rhonda said. "Italian women are very fashionable." "Fran, you're Italian, and you're very fashionable. You're going to look fine. Better than fine, you're going to look great," Sammy said. I glanced down at my outfit. Black top, black pants, black shoes. Simple and boring.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?